AngularOrange.io giving you a tutorial on Angular calling the AWS API Gateway. Now, this is really a part of our HttpClient module course. We also have an HttpClient demo, but most of it focuses on Angular and how you build Angular applications using the HttpClient. This particular tutorial is really going to show you, going from back to front, how to build a Lambda function, how to expose an API using the API Gateway, and then how to use the HttpClient to actually call the application, call the web service. So there's a lot of moving components, and it's a very high-level overview. So I think it would be very useful. Okay, so the bottom line is you have a user who wants to make a web request. We have an index.html, and we have an Angular application, which is this light blue area, and this provides the functionality and interactive responsiveness for the user by providing a UI component tree, governed, driven by an app module, etc. But when we have an HTTP client making a web service, let's say it's an HTTP GET, that HTTP client or that object could be embedded inside a service, and that service could be injected into a UI component. So the bottom line is, from the HTTP client, you are making an HTTP GET request, and we're going to be doing that through the API Gateway, which we'll call a Lambda function. Let's suppose that Lambda function is get data, or whatever we call it. It doesn't matter. It will go get some information out of a NoSQL database, DynamoDB, and then the response would come back through the gateway and come back, and the response in the HTTP client could be an object, it could be a user-defined type, it could be an HTTP response object from the HTTP client module. It really doesn't matter. We're going to show you that we have several methods hanging off this API gateway that we can call. Now, the HTTP client method, HTTP client course that we offer goes through all the HTTP client methods and goes through how to use all of these URLs. But this particular demonstration and tutorial is going to show you briefly how the AWS gateway is being used on the back end to serve some of the functions that I'm testing with the HTTP client. Okay, so this is what we're going to do. We're going to create an AWS Lambda function. It's going to be a Node.js. It's going to access DynamoDB, a NoSQL database, to go get a JSON object. We're going to test the AWS Lambda function. We're going to create the AWS Gateway API. We're going to test the AWS Gateway API. We're going to deploy that API service. And then we're going to introduce the HTTP client into an app, Angular app. We're going to call the HTTP methods from Angular, do a get, post, whatever, and then we're going to end the tutorial. So I have a lot to cover, even though it's simple as it's already done, but it's a little bit simple. So bottom line is, I do have my project running in the background, and I could show you the code, but let me first show you the AWS console. So I have an account with AWS, and I get access to all the web services. And I've also created an admin user, which has administrative capabilities, and I'm logged in as that admin user, and I see everything that I need to see to serve an application. Okay, so here's the services we're going to use. We're going to use the Lambda service. These are Node.js microservices that access DynamoDB to do a get, put, patch, whatever we need, a delete, whatever we need, we could implement those functions. Then we use the API Gateway to expose an API so that you can make REST web service calls to the API Gateway. And I don't think I'm real. We use CloudWatch to log the console logging in our Node.js Lambda functions. Go into CloudWatch, so we go in there and we look around. And IAM is also used for identity access management. I have a role which is attached to the API Gateway or Lambda, whatever it may be, and that allows you to do certain things with these functions. And so this aspect of the configuration is extremely important. I'm not going to go into too much detail with it, but bottom line is the Lambda has access to needs access to write to CloudWatch to log. The Lambda needs access to read and write to DynamoDB. The API Gateway needs access to invoke the Lambda function. So this is stuff I don't want to bore you with. Let's just go to the details. So here's how you do it. You go to your Lambda functions, and you have the ability to create a function. Now, first let me show you the function I'm going to use. Okay, so this is the gateway get. Okay, that I'm going to use. So creating a function, basically what I do is I say, okay, give me a hello world Node.js example using Node 6. I create it. I get this little stub method, and I start implementing my functionality, and then I save it and I test it. So I'll skip that piece because it's pretty tedious. And I could show you everything I need to show you in this function. Okay, so what do we have here? Amazon lets me create the function, and after I get a stub, I have my runtime defined, and I have this handler method, and I could implement the function. Okay, so let's just look at the larger picture. So that's the implementation. And then I have other things I could do. Execution role. I'm executing this function as a Lambda basic execution. This thing allows my Lambda function, gives it permission to access DynamoDB, and gives it permission to access the CloudWatch logging mechanism, whatever. And the bottom line is that has to be configured, set up, and I have to point to it and use it. All my other Lambda functions use this Angular orange public role, which I could probably test later, but I switched it because I was having some issues and I just wanted to see whether that resolved the issue. But right now I'm just saying a Lambda basic execution role, and I define that to have certain privileges. And in this case here, the privilege is that this Lambda function can access a particular table in my DynamoDB. Okay, so if I want to test this, I go and I configure events. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to pass in a query string parameters variable to test. And if this doesn't work, I'm not going to worry about it. But the bottom line is there's something else you have to know about the API Gateway. I've configured the API Gateway that I defined a get method, and I configured it to use a Lambda proxy. And with the Lambda proxy, I could do things a certain way, but my request and response becomes a little bit more integration friendly, where I have a little bit more control over what's happening in and out of the gateway. So I'm not going to, well, let's say in and out of the Lambda function, but I won't get you too concerned with that. Let's just try to test the Lambda function to see what happens. So right now this Lambda function is executing, and I get to look at the log file in CloudWatch, and I also get to look at my result. So it looks like my result in my Lambda function, I responded with a JSON object, which was a response that's required by the Lambda proxy. So I define a status code to headers, and this is very important for controlling the allow origin and different things that you might need. But the bottom line is, with the web service, I might just get the body and render it. So that's basically what I do. And so let's go back. And like I said, if I look at the log files, I'm actually going into CloudWatch, and I get to see my log files, and I could see exactly what's happening. Basically an object comes in and it's an event. And I could look at the event. This is the event I tested, and this is the context This is the function I invoked, and there's some information here. Some of this stuff is really critical in Lambda functions, because if I use an SDK and I'm making a call from a mobile device, you'll see device IDs and other things associated with what device is making the call. So it's important, but up to this point, it hasn't been that valuable to me, even using Swift applications. But anyway, let's move on. Okay, so you get a chance to see what you're doing, and so what I do is I log certain things just to make sure that things are coming along well in my log file. I mean, I make a request on this gateway demo table with a key of email, so I could go and pull an object, and then I wound up getting the object back out of the DynamoDB, and now I'm in my Lambda function, and I could see that it's correct. Okay, so there's a lot of nice things here with the Lambda functionality, and being able to do what you want with a Lambda function. Now, let's go through the Lambda function really quickly, just so I could show you what I did. And I did this very quickly. It's nothing fancy, but what I do is I use the strict mode, and I log this loading gateway get handler, and I include certain things that I might want to use. The AWS SDK, which I don't think is required, but I could also use DynamoDB. I have a table name declared globally, and I also have this DynamoDB doc client that I use that makes my life easier in interacting with DynamoDB. And you got to be careful what variables you put up here. These are all read-only for me, but at the same time, and I might be doing something wrong here, but like I said, it's just a demo, so don't worry about it. But the bottom line is, as multiple threads go into this microservice, you're reusing some of these variables, so you got to be very careful whether they're outside the handler or inside. And Amazon gives you this capability of exporting these handlers, and you get this event, and I log the event, and I could see what's coming in to the request, and then I have a context, and it shows me the context, and I define certain things here with the query. I go to the event, and I get the query string parameters, and what I do is I might log the email associated with that. We saw that, and then I set up this params. I log the params to make sure my request into DynamoDB is correct, and then I do a doc client get, and I pass the parameters in, and this goes and does the get for the DynamoDB data, and when I get it back, I log it, but I also put it in this item, and then in my response object, which has to come back with my callback, because I'm using the Lambda proxy, this is what they want, the response. I could have not used the proxy and just passed back the data that I was trying to get. I've done that plenty of times, but here I'm using the proxy. So I call back with the response, and that's basically what you get when you test this thing and you get the result. You would basically get back that response. So the bottom line is I have to implement this Node.js, and I have to return whatever's needed. Okay, so now once I do this and I test it, and it has access to DynamoDB, let's go take a quick look at DynamoDB real quick. I have a table, and what you do is you create a table, and then you make sure you're using a key, and here's my key, email, and I could have a secondary key, but I didn't use one. But the bottom line is I just have this object I put in here, which has my key and my data, and the goal is to use the API Gateway to go get that information. So I go through the Lambda function. Okay, so and just so you know, DynamoDB has nice capabilities as triggers. If I do a get, put, delete, I could trigger another Lambda function. So it's a real microservice environment here. But be careful what you do and what you use. My personal opinion is there's an async module in Node.js. Use it wisely. But there's other things like the simple workflow service, and there's triggers, and you could do things a certain way if you really want to. But there's pitfalls and there's advantages in all different scenarios. Okay, so let's go back now. So we understand Lambda is talking to the NoSQL. We understand that Lambda has to have the permissions to talk to NoSQL. And like I said, I could show you the IAM where I have permission, but let me go to the API Gateway first. Okay, so now let's look at the API Gateway. Basically, what I did is, you have certain demos that come with the API Gateway. This pet store pets, and I've modified these, and I have some APIs for Angular Orange IO, and here's one I just did for some of the training. Basically, you have this interface where you have a get function, and you could test this thing, and it goes through the request, and it goes through an integration request, and it invokes the Lambda, and it comes back, and you get to test these things. But the bottom line is you get this user interface to go and start requesting what you need. So in this case here with this function, I might have certain required parameters that have to come through with the URL, and let's see if I have any HTTP headers. I have an AO token I might use. So I go through this in our course, and I go through all these methods, and so in our course and in our demo, we actually go through some of these methods and use some of these functions. But anyway, let's move on. But the other thing I guess I should show you is that as you look at some of these things, you could also deploy the API, and you could deploy it to a particular stage. Okay, and once you do that, then your API is effective. And when you go look at that stage, it'll show you the URL that you can use to do the get or the post or whatever. This is the URL. So it's the same URL doing the post, the get, etc. It's just a question of the API you're using inside of the HTTP client that designates which method you're using. Okay, so let's back up. Let's go here again. Now here's my demo. I didn't put a description in here. I'm not finished with it, but I have a get method, and it defines the round trip request. And so I already tested the Lambda function. Now I'm at the API Gateway, and I could test the API Gateway. By the way, this option, I turned on the CORS capability. I enabled CORS, so my local host :4200 can access this API Gateway, and I turned it on, struggled with it. Sometimes it happens easily, sometimes it doesn't, but the bottom line is our Lambda function has to respond with certain things precisely for it to really work. So there was some struggle there, but the bottom line is the enabling CORS should be point and click, but it's not really necessarily point and click. Okay, so anyway, let's take a look at this. So the method request doesn't require anything. It really doesn't require anything. My get is just going to invoke a Lambda function which returns my object. So I didn't have to do much configuration. In the integration request, I have the choice to just invoke a Lambda function or invoke a Lambda function or use a Lambda proxy integration, which I did. The request is proxied to Lambda with request details available in the event of your handler function. There's a little bit more to it than that. I had to really respond with a particular object that the proxy integration wanted. So if I didn't check this thing, it would basically be the Lambda function returning the body object, which was the email address, the name, the address, and the phone number of an object coming out of NoSQL. But anyway, I'm trying to do the simplest thing as possible. Now here's my gateway get. This is my Lambda function. If I click here, I go back to Lambda, and it shows me the Lambda function. Now let me see if I could even go back. I don't even think I could go back to the API Gateway here. Can I? Let's see. Yeah, that's the one thing I really don't care for here. I don't even have a back button. So I don't really. Let me just go back the snail way here. So I'm in demo. I'm looking at my get. Okay, so we just looked at the get. Let's go and test it. It's asking me for parameter. Let me pass in this, since there's only one object in my NoSQL table. So let me just make sure that I can actually define it. So here I am. I'm going to test this guy. And here's my result coming out of the gateway. Beautiful. Okay, so I love this because you want a test bed. You don't want to struggle with all the things you want in a server, set up a Node app, and all this other stuff. You just want to use the microservice environment and use Amazon, and you want to get everything you want done very, very quickly. So once you get it done and you know how to do it, I'm going to say, loosely speaking, it's pretty much you do all the other methods the same way and make sure you're copy and pasting lambdas and responses. And the bottom line is you're really doing a lot of copy and pasting, but you still do have issues. So anyway, we know that this works now. Now let's do this. Let's go back and take a look at the. Okay, let's move forward. There's an option here, and like I said, I went here and I enabled cores. And when you do that, and I'm not going to do it now because I already deployed, when you enable cores, the dialog box comes up and it says, allowable URLs, and it has a star there, and there's certain things you might want to put there or configure. The content type and stuff like that, and I leave it all by default, but I've modified things plenty of times to try to get things to work, but as long as everything is working. So there's a lot of moving parts here, but the bottom line is, so this options gets created, and it's sort of like a mock integration request, but it somehow gets used with my get to make sure that my my cores is set and stuff like that. So we won't get into that too much, but then like I said, you come here and you deploy the API, and then you can go to it gets deployed, and when I deploy it, it goes to dev. So if I look at stages, I got dev, and if I look at dev, I've got an interface, and if I look at dev, I also have the URL. So let's take a look at the URL real quick, and let me hit on it. Okay, here it is. I did this before. I hit on it, and voila, I get some JSON data back. Beautiful, love it. Okay, so now I know this API works. It's a get, passing a param, and getting some results. So I know it works. So now I'm all set. Okay, now let me just go through one more thing here so you know. IAM is always a big part of everything you do, and so if you go look at roles and you go look at what role I was using this one, and this is the one I use for my course and everything else like that. But let's take a look at this real quick. Let me open up this one first. Okay, so this says that I'm allowed. This role allows me to log. So I could do all this logging. Okay, so let's go back and look at the other one. This one allows the Lambda function, or no, it allows this role to access this resource, gateway demo table, and it allows it to get it only does gets. Okay, so when I do a post, I'm gonna have to modify this and enhance this. But here's the beauty of this, is that you can only get. So this is a web service. It's an API that can only read from my data. Can't do anything else. So it's a public API that can only read. Okay, so let's move on. Is there anything else I'm using? Okay, let me go now into Now let's go into, let me show you the application first. Okay, so the application looks like this. I have an Angular application which uses HttpClient to do a get on that AWS API Gateway method, and or I say endpoint. And basically what I have here is I pretty much styled this little snippet here that I do a get call on that service, and the result comes back. Okay, so the HttpClient get is happening. I am getting the result, putting it into a variable, and property binding and directives in the template are rendering whatever's showing up on the front end. So let's go take a look at the code real quick, so you have a better idea of what we're dealing with. Now, where's my code? Here it is. Okay, so let's go into presentation mode. So basically, I have this HttpClient methods object project, and basically I extended it. I created with Angular CLI 4.4. I've extended it so I could do this get request. This particular project does a get, put, patch, delete, does the works. But I'm going to just show you one method. Okay, so let's take a look at the app, and so let's go and view. Okay, so I'm in the application. So what I'm going to do is first show you. Okay, I have an index. I have a single component here. There's nothing complicated about this. This is just to show you how to use the HttpClient to interact with the AWS API Gateway. So I have this root app, and I have this main driver. The main driver basically is bootstrapping an app module. So I go look at the app module, and what I have is an app module where I'm using the HttpClient module. So I'm importing that from Angular Common HTTP. I make sure it's part of my imports. I bootstrap my root component. So now let me go take a look at my root component. I look at my components directory, because I could see where it's coming from here. And I only have one component. It's a root component. And I'm just showing you that root component with that simple front end making a call. Okay, so let's take a look at that component real quick. I know I could use this button, but I don't like using it. Okay, so let's take a look at what I have here. Okay, so cut and paste. I use the HttpClient. I might use these if I extend my my model error handling objects from the HttpClient module. I could use the HTTP response. I could use parameters, headers, and this particular example has a bunch of methods in it. So I want to leave those things in there because some of my methods I might use the HTTP error response, etc. But to make a long story short, I need the client, I need the HTTP params for this particular demo I'm showing you, and there's other things here I probably don't need, but I do need the observable. Okay, and then what I do is I define my object. It has the key, the email key, has a name, address, phone number. So that's my user data I'm gonna define. I might not even use that for my get. We'll take a look. Okay, and we have a component. We annotate it. We have the app-root and selector. We have the external template, the external style sheet. We have a title, which I'm going to bind to the front end, which says "Welcome to HttpClient Methods Demo," whatever. And I have these URLs, which are changing. However, they really should be the same for all the different methods within a service. So right now I have a get URL. And I defined it to be this way. And that's the thing that the API Gateway showed me. This is your URL. And then what I did was I have this get result, and I don't know if I need to initialize it, but the get result is getting rendered and bound to the front end initially. So I think if there's nothing in it, I might see an error in the log file. I'll double check, but but the bottom line is I put it empty for a reason. But when I do the web service result through the AWS API Gateway, I'm going to take the result and put it in the get result attribute of my method. Change detection, property binding will show you the front end that like we've seen. And there's other things I might use, which are not important for this particular example, but for posting I might have a payload. But notice I don't have a proper key here, so I did a fake post on that one. Didn't go to DynamoDB, but let's move on. Here's my get function. Okay, so the other important thing is the HTTP client gets injected into the constructor. The private HTTP tells TypeScript, create me an implicit variable called lowercase HTTP, which is pointing to an instance of the HTTP client type. And so my get has access to that HTTP. So what it does is it defines an HTTP params. It sets email equal to steve@angularorange.io. Now, HTTP params is sort of an immutable. It is a mutable object. So the set returns a new object. When I do the HTTP GET, I do it on the GET URL, which was my AWS API Gateway URL that Amazon told me to use. I pass in the parameters, and I subscribe. When you do the subscribe, the web service gets called, the result comes back, and what I do is I take that result and put it into GET result. Now, I didn't use my user data here, and I think it's because I got a little confused when I started using this type, because then this response would have been of user data type, and I could use the dot notation to do what I need to do. In this simple case, it's not worth the trouble. This guy comes back as an object, and I'm piping it into JSON. I'm just showing you what the object is. So you have an object which has JSON data in it, and when I pipe it into a JSON pipe, it shows you the JSON object, and that's why. And then I also use the PRE tag to pretty it up a little bit and show you this code style result of the JSON object on the front end. And then if there's an error, I basically render the error. So that's really all the code does. And like I said, let's look at the template, because the template is a very important part of this. So my template does what? It says, welcome to HTTP client demo, whatever I'm saying. There's an Angular logo that comes in. Now when you generate a project using Angular CLI, using Angular 4.4, it generates a sample app which has some documentation, an Angular logo, etc. So I leave some of that stuff in there. So here's the get. It's a div. My ID is do get because I style it. When the user clicks and the click event occurs, this directive, the left paren, basically invokes a method do get, and that's the method we were just looking at. Okay, so the button shows you do get call, and that's how you do it. When I get the result, I basically log it using the interpolation directive. I log it. I mean, I show it on the front end, and I also log it in the method. But then I pipe it into the JSON so it results in a pretty way. If I didn't do that and I used a user data type, I would have to do a dot name here or something to make it show up, show the results. So that's it for that piece of the object. Now I actually do all the methods here, but like I said, I'm pointing to different Lambda functions, different gateway APIs in this project. And when I update my course, I'll be consistent, show it in all the methods will do a consistent thing with DynamoDB, and but right now that's not my goal here. I have a style here. I background the color. I have a height. I do some padding. I style the object. So that's really all I wanted to show you there. So let's go back to the front end just to review. Okay, so this is what the front end looks like. Every time I modify the code, it gets re-rendered. The server in the back end is using WebSockets to update the client, and if I do get, the result would come back. I'm trying to figure out why that was so slow. My guess is that DynamoDB, but it really shouldn't be that slow. And I'll tell you why I think it's that, because I've done a bunch of Lambda functions with the API Gateway, and it came up very, very fast. The result, even the post, the patch, the put, and the delete calls happen very, very quickly. But I pretty much simulated those with JavaScript code in the Lambda function, and I didn't show that in our course. I really was just trying to show you how to do the HttpClient calls. Okay, so really going back to the code, you'll notice that you can do all the methods using the API Gateway. I do the post. In this case here, I use the post URL, a payload, and I use headers. And that was just a demo to see how my gateway would handle headers, and I managed to make it happen, although I was surprised with some things that happened with the typing of this content type. It was kind of interesting. And then I do a patch. Patch can update an attribute of the JSON object. So this patch would go into a Lambda function and get the record, update the record with a phone number, but it's a phony baloney one. You really need the key to do that, so I need to extend this with an email. And then there's also a put, which is the same thing. In order to put and replace an object, you really need the key. And then I do the delete. So that there, as long as you do the functions on the HttpClient, you're doing that particular method, but your Lambda functions and your API gateways have to be exposed differently. Okay, so that's really all I wanted to show. Let's just go back real quick and look at, I don't know if I still have the gateway up. Yes. Okay, let's just go back and look at the gateway one more time. So this was part of the training course, and I deployed all of these functions, and they're doing different things. And so a real live API coming out of the gateway would go through the gateway, would have the configuration information, would go through Lambda functions to do real gets, post, puts, deletes, etc., which probably means that you're going against the DynamoDB database and you're operating on data. And so basically, there's two aspects of using the gateway, and there's two aspects of what we were demoing and training and doing tutorials in our courses. One is using HttpClient properly. The other one is setting up Amazon with the proper functions and APIs that are needed. And so there's loaded technology on both sides of the house. And so just keep in mind that nothing is easy. But if you want a robust server environment to do everything you want, get an account with AWS, use all the services needed. There's a lot of nice stuff here that you could use. And I pretty much touch up, and S3 is just very powerful. My Angular apps always wind up on S3. Everything gets cached on CloudFront using Common Directory Networks, and everything's accelerated, and there's just a lot of nice things you could use. Okay, that's what we wanted to show for the demo. If anyone has any questions, go to angularorange.io. You can look up my contact information, give me a call. I'm more than happy to talk to anyone. And don't forget, Angular Orange for training. Thanks a lot.